And from under $1 billion in 1998 to over $100 billion in 2012, the Indian IT industry has been a poster child of post-reform liberalized India. Industry body Nasscom has played a pivotal role in nurturing the growth of the sector, and today its membership accounts for 95% of the industry's revenues. So as Nasscom completes 25 years, India's tech industry will have to reposition and re-engineer itself to maintain its relevance and its dominance. In 2020, Nasscom sees the industry touching $300 billion in revenues, but this milestone won't be a reality if Indian companies adopt a business-as-usual approach. The next wave of growth will have to be driven by innovation, higher value-added services, and non-linear growth. To talk about the opportunities and the challenges of the next 25 years, joining us today are Chandrasekhar, the president of Nasscom, Som Mittal, the former president of Nasscom, and Kiran Karnik, the former president of Nasscom. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here, and congratulations to all of you on celebrating this important milestone for Nasscom as you turn 25. You know, this takes me back to the headlines that were created when Devang Mehta, who of course was the poster boy of Nasscom, talked about broadband Bharat and talked about the digital dream. And we still have the same slogan that we're pushing in this country. Mr. Chandrasekhar, you know, let me start by asking you about that. The slogan remains the same. I mean, yes, we have seen India change. We've seen internet become a reality, almost 300 million active internet users. The mobile revolution has taken over. But the slogans pretty much still remain the same, don't they?
Well, the slogan certainly remains the same, but the aspiration level has certainly gone up hugely. The awareness of, you know, what it can bring, and the glimpses of the transformation which are already there with us today have, I think, made that tantalizingly real. And therefore, I think today we are in a much better position to appreciate not only what this goal means, but also what it is like to experience some of the fruits of that. We are seeing that every day around us.
But what was it really like, Som Mittal, putting the Indian IT industry together? Nasscom, as I pointed out, has played a pivotal role in organizing the Indian IT industry. The biggest advantage was that the government didn't come in your way, and that perhaps has been the biggest role that the government could have played, was to stay out of the way as far as the Indian IT industry was concerned. But what was it like?
Well, you know, I must first say that the government did play a very positive role. So I remember in 99, 2000 that you mentioned, we used to have a big antenna. We had only 126 kbs of connectivity, 128, and now you have fiber running, so fiber may not have reached the villages. So I think there has been a lot of stuff that the government did, but more than that, I think it's just been the sheer numbers. This is a people-based industry. We need to ensure that the skills are available, 24/7 operations. It has to be mission critical. And then the technological changes that kept happening. So it's been quite a ride, I would say, but I think the industry has done really well by keeping up to it. And Nasscom had to play a major role because, you know, the policies and so on are very difficult to keep pace with the change in technology. So I think for us, whether it was fighting...
And more so today, I mean, you know, the pace of innovation is far ahead of regulation. We're seeing it as far as the challenges that the shared economy is throwing up at this point in time, the Ubers of the world. You know, so the pace of regulation continues to be far behind the curve as far as innovation is concerned.
So the main thing that happened is that I think over the years, we've been able to, as Nasscom, position it as a very trustworthy body, representing all segments, one single voice, people who compete, collaborate.
The product guys complain about that. The product guys always complain about that.
Yeah, so they would be, but I think we've done well. There is always a case of, so, and more the merrier, right, people who work together. But I think the fact is that we did work together, and I think we have a seat on the table, not only in India, but also internationally on issues that we have faced. So that all has helped, but it's been quite a ride, and I would say, and Kiran would probably be able to add more, I think we have seen huge downturns. We had crises of various kinds. Outsourcing became an issue globally. But in all these things, I think industry is well positioned. There is no talk that can happen about IT, BPM, engineering services.
Without India.
Without India.
Yeah. Mr. Karnik, you know, you want to dwell on some of the challenges that you faced while you were steering Nasscom. And those were challenging times when the outsourcing debate had become such a hugely politicized debate. It continues to be so, but India was really front and center when it came to the entire outsourcing debate, and then, of course, the financial crisis.
Well, you know, it's a nice thing to be a target because that means you're important and because you're big. But you're right, we went through, and my question used to be, what's today's crisis?
Yeah.
Because we used to have one every day. But, you know, as Som just said, the role of Nasscom has been critical in this. I don't want to overplay it, but it's been phenomenal, because whether you look at the outsourcing backlash, as it was called, from the US, whether you look at one data leak somewhere that makes the headlines everywhere, including the Wall Street Journal, we had to take action to make sure that the industry as a whole was secure and projected an image of being trustworthy, of being reliable, of producing quality. And I think that's something that Nasscom helped to put together.
Mr. Chandra, let me get you to put on your former DOT secretary or government hat and talk about what the role the government can play as look at touching that next milestone, the $300 billion by 2020 milestone that Nasscom is putting forward as a projection. You know, there's a lot of talk about smart cities, digital India, so on and so forth. And of course, the export opportunity continues, though the uncertainty as far as global growth is concerned does scare and worry us or make us nervous every day. But what is the role that you now see the government playing as we talk about the next 25?
It's very important for the government to take a balanced view on what can be done by the private sector and what is best done by the private sector and leave it to them. But there will be areas where the government has to step in and supplement this. For example, if you look at the optical fiber infrastructure, then there are many areas where the optical fiber infrastructure doesn't present a good business case today. So if government wants to lead this revolution, then it has to also play its role in leveraging... So
would you say an infrastructure will really be the government's domain or ought to be the government's domain?
That's one part. I'm only saying even in infrastructure, telecom itself is infrastructure, but a lot of it has been done by the private sector. But a very carefully discriminated approach of going in, stepping in precisely those areas where the private industry would not be doing it because the business case doesn't
Would you say, and I'm digressing a bit, but would you say it makes sense for the government now once and for all to decide what they want to do with MTNL and BSNL and actually spend that money on setting up networks, setting up the backbone, the infrastructure, and let the private guys deal with this stuff?
If you look at, the spread of the optical fiber, and if you look at taking this infrastructure down to the villages, the fact of the matter today is that more than half, in fact close to 2/3 of the optical fiber infrastructure in the rural areas happens to be with the BSNL. And therefore they have followed, government policies to push infrastructure into certain areas. It has not been purely by business calculations alone. So while, of course, how you deal with them and whether you privatize it or not are questions which need to be grappled with, in the current situation, it is also useful sometimes to have an instrument like that which is available to push infrastructure into such far-flung areas where it's not going by commercial forces alone. So connectivity is only one part of the whole story. The other one which you referred to earlier, I think is critical, which is the regulatory piece. And we've seen already in areas like e-commerce, in the examples like Uber and so on, how the regulatory framework sometimes
do we need an independent regulator?
I don't think that this is a question of needing another super regulator. We've probably got enough regulators as it is. But the fact is that when you migrate into a digital economy, there are many laws which become outdated. And therefore they need to be reviewed. Whether you are looking at, in a case like Uber, for example, how commercial vehicles are licensed and how they are used. And many of the laws end up becoming impediments to that digital future. I think what needs to be ensured is that the regulatory framework doesn't become an independent, that you recognize where these impediments are early. And that is where, again, a body like Nasscom and the IT industry has to play a role in helping to look at some of these issues and helping to solve them as well.
But so, Mittal, do you believe that, for instance, e-commerce, if you look at 2014, the lion's share of the money that's come in, whether it's from venture capital funds or it's from private equity, has gone into e-commerce companies, and not just e-commerce services companies, but also e-commerce product companies. And yet the government refuses to acknowledge the fact that you need to clear up the system as far as regulations are concerned. Indian companies are being forced to headquarter out of Singapore and so on and so forth. And these are first generation entrepreneurs who've seen phenomenal growth in the last 10 years. Do you feel hopeful that there will be a realization that, more needs to be done? On one level, we talk about the ease of doing business, and then on the other, we complicate matters like this.
And you're right, so I think the political reality of, I think it's a political issue. E-commerce is happening, and FDI is coming in one way or the other, right? It's a question of B2B versus B2C and so. But, and this whole thing about many companies, in fact, do you know that many companies, international companies that used to have board meetings in India don't have it anymore? Because somebody says this is called permanent establishment, so you can't take decisions here. So I think all these archaic laws have to change now. And you don't need a regulator. I think this is very simple stuff. I think we went overboard in terms of our tax activism, if I will call it, and I think it put us behind many, many years. So we want more people to come and see what's happening in India. India has a promise, and we can deliver on it. So I clearly see, but we have hope, as all of us would.
That economic reality and political reality will be more aligned this time around.
Yeah, it has to be, and stars are aligned at this point of time like never before, and if we can't do it now, we probably can't ever. And I think we have opportunities both globally. We haven't yet opened up our markets fully to Japan and China, right? We have opportunities within the country. We have small companies that we need to support. So there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done.
I'll talk about each of those issues, but Mr. Karnik, since we are talking about the next wave of growth as far as Indian IT is concerned and the domestic opportunity, while so far it's been a sort of, small piece of the pie, so to speak, but with this government's efforts to move towards smart India and so on and so forth, perhaps the domestic opportunity can play an important part. We also heard from the RBI governor saying that make for India should be as important as make in India, because let's not ape China, let the consumption story be domestic driven. In that context, how do you really see the domestic IT story panning out?
Well, I'm very excited about the domestic IT story for two reasons. First, I think the contribution that IT can make within the country for all kinds of things, both for business efficiency, competitiveness, efficiency, but also very importantly for basic social issues like education and health. It's phenomenal. But the good thing is that unlike in many other areas, what you make in and for India is equally applicable, maybe with some bells and whistles added, and maybe changing the rupee sign to a dollar sign, equally applicable outside. If we can build products because we can interface with consumers here much more easily, because we can test betas, we get a chance to go back and forth, somebody hopefully is willing to take a chance saying this guy is next door, he'll fix it if it goes wrong, and helps him to develop good things like products. Then that can go into the world market. So the expertise that you build here on the Indian market is not just limited to what you do in India, but that enables you to have a springboard to go outside the country. And therefore there's a dual benefit of both serving India and getting out into the world and making good money. I think that's very, very exciting. And the new opportunities coming up with broadband, which Shekhar mentioned, cloud, which gives you all kinds of new things to be able to do, and the fact that you're a mobile platform in this country at a huge scale is, I think, a phenomenal convergence of possibilities. And add to that, things like the UID platforms, the banking inclusion platform where you have common numbers. I think you're opening up new possibilities altogether to both serve the country and then to take that expertise and what you've developed there to productize services and take them to the rest of the world in a big, big way.
On that note, it's time for us to take a break. When we return, we continue our conversation as Nasscom turns 25. Welcome back. You're watching our special conversation. We're talking about the future of the Indian IT industry as industry body Nasscom turns 25. Let me ask Somital and Mr. Chandrasekhar, this issue about re-engineering or repositioning ourselves for the next 25, because as several of your own members have said, that it cannot be a business as usual approach because, the low-cost arbitrage model is over. We've seen this model change from offshore, onshore, all of that business. Now, we're talking about the SMAC opportunity and so on and so forth. Do you believe that we're positioned at this point in time to make use of the opportunities that the world is throwing at us? And what kind of re-engineering would you expect or would like to see as far as the Indian IT industry is concerned?
So I think, we have done well. Every wave of change, right, this industry has navigated from Y2K to client server to ERP. I think we have done fairly well having, navigated that well. Being cheap is not bad. Right, so I think everybody goes and buys value. So India has done very well by cheaper, better, faster. And now what the customers are expecting is truly transformation. And to be able to do transformation, you need domain expertise. Right? You need contextual. So I think you would see in the coming years, industry investing significantly more in domain and significantly more in presence with the customer, because you can't be deciding how banking will work in the US and Europe and Japan sitting out of here. So I think that is happening. And while it may not be the majority, but a fair percentage, right, of business is the transformational business that is coming in.
You know, speaking of game changers, Mr. Chandrasekhar, and I'm just looking at a McKinsey report where they talk about, you know, the kind of potential. They've identified 12 technologies that they believe can really act as game changers, whether it's cloud-based services, automation, digital payment, verifiable digital identity, remote healthcare, adaptive learning, the Internet of Things. You know, so the next 25, you believe, is really going to be driven by this?
The next 25 years is certainly going to be driven by a lot of these technologies. And interestingly, it so happens that all these technologies are particularly relevant for the kind of issues and problems that we face. Now, where it gets really exciting, and this is what makes the future really look so exciting, is that as we embark on Digital India and we look at applying some of these things within our own country, you have to put three things together: the ability to apply technology, the ability to innovate, and the knowledge of local conditions, which enables you to bring these together. Very few countries have all of this sitting right there. And at just that moment, here comes a government which says Digital India. What more can you ask for in terms of opportunities?
Absolutely. Speaking of the opportunities, Mr. Karnik, you know, it's taken us 25 years to cross the $100 billion mark. It's also taken us 25 years to create companies like Infosys, TCS, and so on and so forth. But the pace of change, you know, the new guys that you talk about, the young blood, so to speak, do you believe that the pace of change is going to ensure that over the next 10 years we'll see the size of companies like Infosys and TCS being created out of this country?
Oh, very definitely. Not next 10 years. It's going to be next 5 years in my scale. I think you're going to see that happening, and for just the reasons that both Som and Shekhar mentioned, that we have the building blocks, we have the capability built up on tremendous experience abroad. We have the context of the country, which we understand well. Domain expertise has been slow, but has been built up. So you've got to add a lot more, but you can re-engineer these pieces. And if I may say only half facetiously, for example, we have the pieces in this country, sadly, of SCAM. You just re-engineer that, and from scam, you get smack. So, you know, we can re-engineer quite easily in this country. So there are, I think, these pieces. And now the exciting thing is that the entrepreneurial ecosystem, on which we were a bit slow, has taken off. The willingness of the young to take risks and go for entrepreneurship is phenomenal. So when you put these things together and then add to that one important dimension, which we've not so far discussed specifically, the convergence between software and hardware and the increasing possibilities of doing much more here because we have the high value added content that comes from capabilities which our mass production friends to the north, who are very efficient, do not yet have. And that gives us the unique advantage to produce.
Are you hopeful that that is actually now going to take place? Because this government has announced a new electronic manufacturing policy and so on and so forth. They're talking about being able to manufacture smartphones out of India, which so far we haven't been able to do. Do you believe that this marriage of hardware and software is probably going to be a reality?
I think completely with a if, and that if is what Som alluded to earlier. You know, if our friends in the Ministry of Finance and Tax Department are going to be accountants and look at how much money is it from the government rather than looking for what's in it for the country, what's in it for the economy, where are we heading, that can kill it all, as we saw in the factory in Tamil Nadu. I won't name the company. So, you know, if that's going to happen, then forget hardware, forget the dreams of any such thing. But if we can take care of that, I think there are phenomenal possibilities.
Yes, so.
Yeah, you know, I just to what Kiran said, I think the opportunity is there, the stars are aligned, but I think there are 2 or 3 things which we should be very cautious about, right? I think government is going to be a big driver in making many things happen, but our government procurement policies are very discouraging, right? A lot of people don't want to because payments don't get made. I think the capacity within the government to absorb technology is lacking, right? I think we've done a lot of work in terms of building that capacity, but there is still a long way to go because it's not about buying technology, but it's also about receiving and absorbing technology. Third, I think while entrepreneurship ecosystem, etc., is working, do you know that the compliance requirement on a 10-people company is the same as for large? And a lot of people are saying that, you know, we had this great idea, but one of our partners is only spending time in compliance. So I think these are as urgent and to be solved parallel because we can't go sequential solving on these.
So these are the domestic challenges that you foresee and largely have to do with the ease of doing business. But Mr. Chandrasekhar, let me ask you about the global challenges that you see and, you know, outsourcing, the backlash against outsourcing is, that debate is sort of been discussed ad nauseum. What are the other challenges that you foresee over the next 25 for the Indian IT industry?
See, there are multiple challenges, I think, which we certainly need to take into account. And many of these take the form of protectionism, whether it is, against outsourcing, or whether it is in relation to skilled people coming in, or it is in relation to data localization, and so on. All of these are detrimental to the way technology works, to the way the skilled people who run this technology operate. And therefore, to counter some of these trends and enable technology like water to find its own level is one very important role that we need to play. The second, in terms of challenges, is that you talked about manufacturing. In manufacturing, there are a lot of trends which have changed the very concept of value addition, where the value addition lies. In manufacturing, a large part is electronics. In electronics, a large part is in design, which we already happen to be very strong in. So how do we leverage these core strengths and then get our footprint? You have to take into account trends like 3D manufacturing and so on, which again have huge implications for whether manufacturing will give you the kind of returns in terms of employment or in terms of value addition that you are expecting. So where are the new opportunities? Where are our strengths, and how do we move into those as quickly as possible? I think that is where we need to be very deliberate and planned in our choice of targets.
Mr. Karnik.
Every time we look at protectionism, whether in the form of barriers for services, or for people movement, or for data movement, I think every time we look out of that window, we should make it a mirror. Because every time we look at that, we've got to be careful.
You have to be careful about what you're doing back home.
And how you're affecting your own industry.
That's true.
And interestingly, this protectionism isn't about the industry there wanting protectionism. They actually welcome us. So in a lot of cases, it's political. So if you look at what's happening in UK on immigration, it isn't driven by the local industry saying, we are getting...
Oh, your biggest supporters are actually the IBMs of the world, So let me get wrap-up comments from you. As I pointed out, Somital, 2020, $300 billion in revenues. Some say that it's an over-ambitious target. Would you say that it's doable, or perhaps you could even do better?
Well, that's what they said when we said 50 billion in 98. That's what they said when we said we're going to do 120 billion in much later. So I think it's an aspiration, right? An aspiration is what we will achieve, but I think we are well on our way to do that.
Well on our way. Kiran Karnik?
Well, as the poet said, your grasp to exceed your reach, or what's a heaven for. But I think it's a doable one. It is within our reach.
Gentlemen, we wish you the very best of luck for the next 25 at Nasscom, and we do hope that all of those targets are met and much more. Thanks very much for joining us on the Cnbc TV 18 special discussion. With that, it's time for us to wrap up the show. We'll see you again next week. Till then, from the entire team, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.